Hello, welcome to the Curator Podcast. This is episode 5. Hi, hello, welcome once again, dear listener, to the Curator Podcast. I'm your host, as ever, Mark Fraser, and you're listening to a podcast about passion. So this is episode 6, and it's been a while since I actually recorded myself speaking. The last few episodes I kind of did in one big batch, so it's been a while since I've done this, so please bear with me. On today's episode, I've got Stephen from Struggletown Records. Now, you might know Stephen from being part of the Scottish music scene, or you might know Struggletown Records from releases such as those by Death Is Not Glamorous, Shook Ones, Into It Over It. Either way, he's quite an interesting guy, very softly spoken, and on this episode we kind of talk a little bit about Struggletown Records, the inspiration behind it, where it began, the sort of DIY roots, the passion of it really. So yeah, got that coming up. We've got a few tunes that I'm going to play by him. That's going to be great. But first things first, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm talking to you, listener. I want to know how you're doing. You having an okay week, an okay day? Whatever time of day you're listening to this at, be it the morning, the afternoon, the evening, I hope you're having an okay time and everything is going okay for you. If it's not, then, well, hopefully this can cheer you up. I mean, that's kind of what I want to do. I want to be interesting and enlightening, and that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm being. So that's how it's going to go. So just deal with it, right? That's the way it is. It's been quite an interesting couple of weeks in terms of trying to get guests for the podcast. I did a few interviews before I actually launched it, and I kind of used some old contact. So now that it's out there and people are listening to it, it means that potential guests can listen to it and are going to want to come on it, because why wouldn't you want to come on it? It's good. It's really, really good. So yeah, thanks for checking it out. If this is the first episode, then hello. If you've checked it out before and you're checking it out again, thanks for your repeat custom. I've had a couple of reviews on iTunes. I've had a few people sign up to the newsletter, and you should definitely sign up to the newsletter, by the way. You can get the newsletter over at thecuratorpodcast.com/newsletter. I do send one out every Sunday. That's just basically 10 cool news stories from the past week. And, you know, I want to enter into a dialogue, a conversation. The Curator is not just a podcast where I curate the experiences and passions of artists from all walks of life. It's also about curating content, interesting content, diverse content, engaging content that starts a conversation and seeks to keep it going. Anyway, enough about this podcast, enough about me. Let's get into the interview. Bit of a long one, but you know what? I think it's really, really interesting. So yeah, I'm just going to open this interview with a track from a Struggletown record release. This song's by one of my favourite bands ever, actually, a band called Shook Ones, and they did a split EP with Death Is Not Glamorous, which was released on Struggletown Records a couple of years ago, and this song is called Thin. So how's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. Yeah, just finished work. Not too bad.
Are you enjoying work?
Yeah, work's fine, man. Work. Yeah, I've got a pretty chilled out job. Good boss. Can't complain.
Cool. That's quite interesting. I was going to ask you a question about that, so let's begin there. With the label, Struggletown Records, how's your life balance and work balance?
It depends who you talk to. If you talk to me, it's perfect and everything's balanced and I'm not stressed and running about doing everything. If you talk to my wife or anyone else, she'll say that I do far too much and I don't have any time. So, it's all a matter of perspective. I'd say it's pretty well balanced. I'm busy a lot of the time with one thing or the other, but I enjoy it all. So it goes pretty well.
So you're not stressing out your head all the time then, no?
No, what I tend to do is I tend to let it all mount up to a point where it's a bit of a critical mass and then sort of reassess it and go, I should have dealt with this like 3 weeks ago, I think a lot of people tend to work like that, but it works pretty well. The only things that sort of suffer occasionally are when you neglect to send a particular email or get back to someone, but people are pretty understanding. Like, what we do exists on a certain level where people don't have great expectations of it. It's a sort of, achieve what you can, promote the bands as best you can, put out good records, and everybody sort of goes along and plays their part in that and is willing to accept when things are a bit later, a bit haphazard. DIY approach, I guess.
So is that level, would you say, is the DIY level? Is that how you would kind of the level that you're at? Oh,
definitely, yeah. We're far from a big label, and we're definitely not at this stage where we're signing people up for 6 album deals or anything like that. So I would say DIY definitely defines our approach to everything, more out of necessity than almost anything else, aside from the fact that it's the only way I would ever do it. But it's a not-for-profit label that we run, so all the money goes straight back into other releases. There's no extra money for like flashy parties or hanging out or paying ourselves a wage or anything like that. So yeah, everything has to be DIY, from hand folding cassette labels to doing the artwork to everything, literally standing there and selling people records at shows. That's kind of about as DIY as it goes.
Do you ever wish it could be more than that? Like, do you ever think, I would like to do this as a full-time thing?
No, I never actually really wanted a job in the music industry at all. It just seemed like a lot of stress for a really small slice of a really, really giant cake, which is just divided up really, really into tiny, tiny bits. Like, I love music, I always have. It's been a huge part of my life, but never ever thought that's the career for me. Always was into creativity in terms of graphic design and artwork and stuff like that. And when I had my dream job of being a skateboard designer dashed for me by a guy that ran a skate shop, he essentially said, you can't, that won't happen. There's about 15 people that do it in the world and you won't be one of them. I was like, okay, I guess I'll do album artwork then. That's the next logical step. So
a lot of faith in you there, man.
Yeah, it wasn't me specifically. It was literally just, I think he's right. I think unless you're an avid skater and you're really good at it and you're in with the right crowd, you're never going to get that job just through doing it. And not to discourage anyone who wants to do that, but it's a very niche market, definitely. If you want to do that, you just need to get really, really, really good at graphic design, and hopefully someone will notice you. But essentially, with me, who has a million things on the go at any one time, I was never going to focus on my artwork enough to become a skateboard designer. And yeah, to me, the next logical step was to design the next coolest thing, or something just as cool, which is album artwork and stuff like that. So I started doing that, and through that, obviously, you meet people in bands and meet people who are interested in releasing records and stuff like that. And that's sort of in a roundabout way how we ended up starting up Struggletown.
That's a good place to start. Well, was my next question, I guess, then, man. So Struggletown started, as you just explained, sorry. But where did the love begin for music, just generally? Oh, well,
I don't know, I guess, again, skateboarding, punk rock, Tony Hawk's too. Everyone has to cite that as their biggest influence of our generation, because that's what got everybody in my area into skateboarding, into punk rock, into hip hop, into metal, everything. So, just hearing those bands on that kind of thing and sending me into record shops, picking up compilations with any band that was on it, got me into the Epitaph compilations, Punkorama, Fat Wreck, all that pop punk, fast paced stuff like that. That's kind of where my real passion started. But I guess it goes further than that. My parents were both really into music. Like my mum and I used to listen to Nirvana and Gun and stuff like that, and my dad was really into, you know, Bruce Springsteen, R.E.M. He was in a punk band or a post-punk band in the 80s. He worked in 23rd Precinct and stuff like that, so there was always amazing music in our house. So I guess it was always inevitable that I would be interested in good music, and I had great access to it. So as a teenager, you know, got into the punk and stuff like that, and sort of just became obsessed with it. And at the time, it was quite tricky to find. It was a very niche thing that there was a bunch of people into, but you had to find them. And the best way to find them was to go to shows, and I would just like scan around the room and look at the t-shirts that people were wearing and go home and download that band, and then using things like LimeWire and Kazaa and just anything I could get my hands on, and then talk on MSN about what other people were listening to. So I guess one of the biggest turning points for me was when I found out that I was emo.
Found out you were emo?
I found out. I'd only recently came out as a mosher, because I thought all the girls give you a hug when you're a mosher, but all the neddy girls were a bit terrifying, and I didn't really want to hug them. So I was like, I'll be a mosher and then I'll get hugs. So that's rad. So watching MTV2 as you do at night, and the usual, you know, Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, etc., and you're like, cool. And then there was this song by this band, Jimmy Eat World, who played Bleed American, and it just blew me away. I was like, this is a totally different thing. Like, it's, you know, so exciting. Like, I really want to go back to school tomorrow and talk about this. Walked in and I was like, did anyone see that song last night, that Jimmy Eat World song? That was amazing. Every single person was like, nah, I don't like it. You're emo. That's ridiculous. I was like, what? And they were like, it was horrible. I was like, no way, it was so good. It was so catchy. It was so exciting. And they were just like, nah. So I was like, right, I better figure out what this emo thing they're talking about is and sort of follow that up a bit. And that gave me a whole nother spectrum of things to become obsessed with. And, you know, everything like post-hardcore bands, you know, like stuff like New Found Glory and Senses Fail and stuff like that, they were the bands that were accessible and available, and you would find through them, it's an endless trail, you know. You just sort of, it's like a breadcrumb trail. You find a band and then you find the associated bands, and you look through the CD sleeve and see the bands they thank and the bands that they're influenced by and stuff like that, and you could be at it for millions of years. But when I was a teenager, that was literally all I was obsessed with. So yeah, that's kind of the origin of my obsession with like punk music and DIY and emo and hardcore and stuff like that.
I don't think emo was even a thing when I was at school, man. I was just a mosher, and like that was it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I didn't expect to get pigeonholed so suddenly by my newfound crowd that I thought were going to accept me with open arms. But I was never really, at the time, I was never really super into the heavier stuff like Slipknot and Korn and stuff like that. I've found a new appreciation for it, maybe a nostalgic thing now, but
exact same for me, man.
At the time, I was like more into like punk and stuff like that, and the other guys were just like, nah, man, Limp Bizkit's quality. And I was just like, is it though? Seems a bit shit. Because at the time, it was like, people call it now the last wave of successful rock bands that could make a massive career out of it, and that's what Limp Bizkit and stuff like that were. So I was kind of, I guess, still being punk and being like, nah, that's too big and too polished and too mainstream for me. I want something a bit more weird and a bit raw.
A few more exceptions to that, I guess, like, I don't know, Alter Bridge and like bands that. But I think probably Slipknot and Korn and that, like the last. You're probably right. It's like the last bastion of. Oh,
for sure. Like that was the one where you could still kind of pin your hopes on having a huge career, making a fortune, having a big house. You know, Blink-182, and I guess, you know, New Found Glory just slightly missed that bus, which is crazy to me to see, because I remember being so, like, I still love that band because of how important they were to me at the time. But I assumed, and I think everybody assumed when we were teenagers, that New Found Glory were famous and huge. And I think even now they're still at a sort of...
they're not?
No, they're not at all.
I still thought they were.
No, I don't think they are. I think they're at like a mid to high level of music, but they still have to tour their ass off and work really hard. And I don't think they have like Travis Barker money. You know what I mean? I don't think they're like MTV Cribs material. I think they'd have just like quite a decent house and stuff like that.
Like, so far hard this could take you.
Exactly. So, you know, I guess that was something that kind of I found out recently that really blew my mind, because I just assumed that anyone that was on TV with a pop song or a rock song was huge. You know what I mean? But it's not necessarily the case. Like, there's
definitely not anymore.
Not anymore, no. So it was a bubble, certainly a bubble for the music industry at that time. I think, interestingly enough, like, I think recently everybody's been sort of trying to find their way back to that and find their way around streaming and you know, the new vinyl hype and stuff like that, and see if we can try and build something that will build it back up to that again. But I don't know. It's not really my remit, but it's interesting to me.
It's not your remit. That's interesting, because I was going to ask you, like, obviously all of that is probably, it sounds like it has kind of led you towards this sort of, well, you've obviously been a huge punk fan for a while, but sort of towards that DIY path. You keep seeing those t-shirts from those people with those bands.
Yeah.
Like, I know who that band is, you know?
Yeah, well, it was that. I mean, those bands were great for like referencing bands that they had been into, and you know, New Found Glory were constantly talking about H2O and punk and hardcore bands, and like there was a point where it was mostly, I guess, what you would call mainstream post-hardcore, where I was like really into like I said, Senses Fail, Armour for Sleep. I guess what was, I don't know, the sort of popular version of emo at the time.
Fuck, I've totally forgot about Armour for Sleep.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Like their first record's so great, but like, I don't know, I wasn't a big fan of the later
stuff. I found at the time that fucking loved their first record, man.
So good. But I worked in Starbucks, and the good thing about Starbucks is there's like a total multicultural crowd, and I met a guy there from Canada who was over visiting his sister, and he was so obsessed with hardcore and so single-minded about it that like he almost like forcibly like found the band that we could talk about on the first day that he worked there. He was like, "Hey man, what kind of music are you into?" And I said, "Oh, you know, pop punk and like punk and stuff like that." And he was like, "Do you like hardcore?" And I was like, "I guess, man. I mean, I like H2O. I don't know this and that." And he was just like so passionate. He was like, "Have you heard of a band called Carry On?" And really weirdly, I'd ordered the New Found Glory record from Bridge 9, and they'd packed it with a sleeve of that Carry On, A Life Less Plagued record. And I was like, well, that's trippy that you would mention this band that I've never heard of. But yeah, and I had a couple of other friends who sort of guided me towards various hardcore bands to check out. But this guy Cameron, who through an absolute need for friends, because he'd been here for so long and just had been out in the sticks, and he couldn't get a job and stuff like that, he just was like, this guy, I'm going to teach this guy about hardcore. And it was amazing. It's like practically like a montage scene from something like Karate Kid, where he's like writing down the names of bands like Champion and tell me where they're from and like what kind of band they are, and like Floor Punch, and like just his absolute obsession with it and excitement for it just was like, oh my god, like I need to get into this. I need to understand why this guy loves this so much.
Fucking Champion, man. Holy shit.
Yeah, exactly. And like it just led me again back into that amazing realm of like cool, let's discover all this. And through that was really where I got the appreciation for like how hardcore works and how it's a massive global community and how it all runs in a DIY level, like at almost all points, no matter how big the band or how big the label. They're constantly like, they're all in smaller bands, they all support smaller bands, they all run their own labels, they all do everything by hand, they all print their own t-shirts. It's all, and it just blew me away that there was this sort of subculture that had been around since the 80s, from, you know, Ian Mackay like putting together records in his house right through to now, and it had massive like stylistic changes, but just this one like core ethos of DIY just burned through the whole thing, and it was so exciting. Like, and I was like, wow, you mean that I could just do that? I could just put out a tape and I could just do it and sell it to people? Because even at that point, as a record collector or as someone who was constantly consuming music, I still had this sort of like, those are record labels, and we're, you know, there was like a separation, and it was that sort of tapping into that scene and my friend's passion for it that really made me realise that you could just start a label and put things out. But even then I was like, nah, I'm not going to do it. Too much hassle. So it was still a couple of years from then before we actually started out releasing anything. But just having that knowledge of sort of DIY and hardcore at that time was just a real eye opener for me, you know. So
how would you describe the ethos of the label? Like, how would you describe it when you began it? And we'll talk more about the origins in a minute. And what it is now, is it the same thing?
Well, we started it as a front, really. It was sort of to disguise the fact that my friends had written and recorded this amazing EP, the band Wolves at Heart. It's like a pop punk band, and this was their second release, and they'd put loads and loads of time and effort and money into it. And I just was like, this is so great. Like, it would be a huge shame if you just released this on CDR, or at the time where people were still doing that, and 15 people bought it and that was it. I was like, maybe we could like make a fake label. I've had this idea for a while for a thing called Struggletown. We just put that logo on it and maybe people will think it's cool. And they were like, yeah, sure. And, you know, I was like, I'll put money into it, obviously, if we're going to do it. Like, so, you know, we split it 50-50, the cost for pressing some CDs. But so I mean, that's an interesting thing to start something that now kind of, I think we're trying to put across this really honest approach. But it essentially was founded on a sort of, let's pull the wool over the music industry's eyes and see if we can get one under the radar. Obviously, it didn't really work that way, but it did turn into a label which I think has been a decent thing for the scene and stuff like that. So I guess that's a positive.
More arms and legs, as they say.
Yeah. It was, at first, it was terrifying because I thought, right, we're actually going to release something. What if nobody buys it? Who cares? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, right, cool. However much money we'll put into it, split it between us. And as soon as we started planning it, we sat down in my flat and we just chatted about how we were going to do it and sourcing places to do it. And I was doing the artwork. And then when we had it in our hands, I was just like, oh my God, this is the most exciting thing ever. Let's keep doing this. This is amazing. I started to think of various bands that I could either re-release or bands I could get in touch with to like talk about doing other things. But as I'd set it out as a not-for-profit, I was just like, right, that's the basis of it. It's not a job, because I never wanted a job doing this. It's not designed to, I don't know, it's basically to provide a platform for bands who I particularly like or who I think have got something that deserves that extra little push, that we either do a release with them or we help them to get shows or we put them on, or, you know, because we do monthly showcases and stuff like that as well. And it's just basically a platform that people can come along and maybe they wouldn't necessarily have got a record put out, or maybe they would, but it's like a sort of a starting point for a lot of things. And also I think a lot of people have sort of clicked onto that and appreciate that and have helped us out by being established artists and willing to put a record out on our label as well. So, but yeah, the core value of it is that DIY, doing it yourself, not expecting anything particularly back for it, just working hard to make sure that it gets the exposure that I think it deserves. So that's kind of Struggletown. That's in a nutshell, I guess.
It took a good friend to point out. Sometimes I bring you up as if you're still around. It's a fight my head is losing, even now. This has taken its toll. I lost my way after all. So tell me where to go. 'Cause there's gotta be more to find than what I'm holding on to. Move on, let go, find your heart and move on. Something went wrong, so make the most of what you now know. It took a long time to not need you lying there as I try to fall asleep. 'Cause there's no other dream worth having, honestly. This has taken its toll. I lost my way after all. So tell me where to go. 'Cause there's gotta be more to find than what I'm holding on to. Move on, let go, find your heart and move on. Something went wrong, so make the most of what you now know. Move on, let go, find your heart and move on. Something went wrong, so make the most of what you now know. If I could forget, I wouldn't dare. I'd never be the same if you were never there. If I could forget, I wouldn't dare. But can't let what we used to have still hold me here. So I'll say to myself, move on, let go, find your heart and move on. Something went wrong, so make the most of what you now know. Move on, let go, find your heart and move on. Something went wrong, so make the most of what you now know.
Is it fulfilled all the successes you imagined that it would when you started out?
When I first started out, I had no idea. I didn't know what I was doing, and I still don't really know what I'm doing. But you
Does
learn.
anyone know what they're doing?
I know, but I mean, particularly with a record label, there are so many, and they do it a certain way, and you just kind of look up to them and emulate them, and you go, okay, well, I see they're doing pre-orders. That seems like a good idea. You kind of work out why, and you're like, right, cool. Oh, so what that does is like it gives people a chance to pick up the record, and it gives you a chance to get some of the money back, and you kind of just figure out how it works and stuff like that. And a lot of the people that do their own labels and run similar things, because we're not the first by any stretch of the imagination. We are propped up and part of a gigantic community of like-minded people who have been doing this for years and years and years, and it's amazing because a lot of those people are a resource that are more than willing to talk to you and more than willing to help you, and that's encouraging from the get-go. As soon as there's Facebook groups for it, there's various things you can email folk and go, hi there, I want to press a record but I don't even really know where to go, and they'll give you links and they'll tell you the pitfalls and this and that, and you'll learn as you go along. You'll learn about getting masters made and you know laying out artwork and all this stuff and the things that are important. So I kind of lost the thread of what you were saying. Has it achieved everything
That you wanted to achieve?
that I wanted it to achieve?
Out?
Yes, a millionfold. Yeah. It's gone way further. We've put out records by people that I look up to, that I loved their music before we even considered being a record label. So that's a huge dream, and I think we've done a pretty decent job for the bands that we wanted to represent that were maybe less well known, smaller, and it's still going, and we're not in a giant hole of debt. So
That's always
yeah. That's an encouraging thought. I think a lot of people have said to me, like, you've set something up here that a lot of people have tried to achieve and not a lot of people have, and I'm not sure that that's particularly true, but it's a nice feeling to know that there are people that think that, like, because Glasgow's a great scene for music and stuff like that, but it's really, really diverse, and there's little pockets of people who are really excited about a particular thing and maybe don't go out with that. At the moment, there's like a huge scene for like the heavier hardcore stuff that I'm not super into, but you have to hand it to the people that have put that together, because they've built that, because it never was big and now it is. There's like 300-400 people turning up to local shows. So, I would say that about them. I would say you've done something that other people would love to do. You've built up a scene for the music that you're into. So, whilst the shows that we put on have been great successes and had their dips and ups and downs at different times, and the records we've released the same, I'd say, and overall in general, yeah, I'd say we achieved what we set out to do, and hopefully we can continue to do it. Definitely.
Just want to drill down a little deeper into that, I guess. What are the biggest setbacks that you've had? You've been going since 2011, so that's like 4 years this year.
Yeah.
And you guys have done quite a lot in 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always lived by the mantra of like, you should never judge another person's story because you don't know what they've been through.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay.
To get to where they are. So
yeah.
Successes and setbacks, like what are the two? I guess not two major ones, but some of the ones which have,
Well, I think a common setback that a lot of labels face that we've had as a band, that you think, right, this band have got a great record, they're a really good band, exciting, but they split up. Like, you just get through all the process of, sending out emails, and you've got all the records and you're ready to go, and they're like, oh, we're not a band anymore because this has happened. And that's happened a couple of times. The biggest one, and it could be considered the biggest setback, but it's also probably one of the biggest successes, was when we were fortunate enough to put out a split for Shook Ones and Death Is Not Glamorous, who are two of the best melodic, fast-paced punk bands. Like, it's hard to pigeonhole them because they span a bunch of different things. But to go back to my friend Cameron, like, I would never know who Shook Ones were if it wasn't for him. Once we had cemented our friendship over how obsessed he was with hardcore, he was like, oh man, come and see this band Shook Ones, I'm going to write a zine, I'm going to interview them. I was like, okay, cool. Never heard of them. Went along. Bob of Punk Rock Grammy, of course, was putting on the show. Really quiet show. Nicest guys you would ever meet. Sitting chatting to them and just laughing and talking about like being on tour. And right up to this point, I was one of those people that would go to shows and just assumed the bands just were in like a little room in the back by themselves, and you couldn't talk to them and they just did whatever. But here we are sitting in stereo, having a laugh and a few drinks and chatting and, interviewing them and getting cool tour stories and stuff like that. So that's like 5 years ago. It was like another couple of years before we started up Struggletown, a year and a half or something. And then me and Nick, who used to be involved, he invited me down. This is before we'd started it as well. He invited me down to Manchester to go and see them play with Title Fight and Basement and stuff like that. So I went and saw them, loved them, they're amazing, got really into their records and stuff like that. And once Nick had got involved in the label and stuff like that, he was like, I'm just going to ask Shook Ones if they want to do a record. And I was just like, God, why would they want to do a record with us? Like, we've put out like a handful of bands that no one knows. It's not going to happen. And he was like, nope, no harm in asking, man, just ask. So he asked Kelly, who plays guitar, and he was up for it. He was stoked on it. He was like, well, actually, we really want to do a split with that band, Death Is Not Glamorous, from Norway. And I was like, oh my God, they're amazing as well. So we chatted about it for a long time, and they were like, yeah, let's do it. And then Nick was also friends with the guy from Run for Cover Records, Jeff, who runs that label, and we chatted about that, and they were like, yeah, we'll do it as well. Like, we'll do the US end, you do the UK end. And at that moment, like, when Nick was like, yeah, they've agreed to do it, I was like, what you said earlier, do you not want it to go further? I was like, not only is it going to go further, but it has to. Like, there's no, I would be doing a disservice to the label if we release this record and then just go, oh, we're just going to go back to doing bands from Glasgow that no one knows. So I was like, wow, this is like a landslide thing. This could be make or break. So it was exciting. And then time went on, and we had the songs, and we went back and forward with the artwork. And Run for Cover had kind of, we're making that transition already, a really well-known, well-established label, but they were putting out loads and loads of great LPs and building up a roster of like a slightly different sounding band, like with a sort of fuzzier edge, like maybe a bit less pop punk and hardcore and a bit more sort of, I don't know, grungy, and pushing that and just focusing on that, I think. And the record sort of went by the wayside a wee bit, and the months started to sort of pile up, and they started putting out more and more LPs and putting their money into that. And it was totally understandable because it was a key point for them and they had to keep that momentum going. But it did mean that pretty much by the time the 7-inch came out, both Shook Ones and Death Is Not Glamorous had stopped. Shook Ones never really put a thing out to say we're not a band anymore, but they were all doing different things. I think two of them were studying for law degrees, and one of them had just started up a clothing label. And then Death Is Not Glamorous sent us an email saying, hi, we're not a band anymore. We don't know if we ever will be. Thanks very much, but let's release this record anyway. I'm like, okay, cool. So obviously something like that, where the momentum of like tours and bands playing and being in people's consciousness really, really helps a record. It's some, like, if anyone's listening to this and they want to release a record, if you can't do a tour to support it, it's probably not worth doing, because the amount that you'll shift just out of people being in front of you and going, hey man, have you got any records? You'll sell them. So any time you think of a band, oh wow, they're great, they're huge, it's because they put the work in with tours and stuff like that. So it was frustrating because I was so sure that we were on the cusp of something huge, and then, you know, we ended up with the delivery of all these records, and loads of people bought them on the pre-order, loads of people were excited, and that was great, but we'd ordered a lot, we still have quite a lot. Shook Ones look to me to be resurfacing, which is exciting, but, you know, so I guess that could sort of count as both, you know, because that moment at first where I was like, oh my God, this is huge, this is like a dream release, to the sort of realization after a couple of months that like we were probably going to have a lot of those records for a long time. Wouldn't change it for the world though, because supporting those two bands and being involved in their career in a tiny way is huge, absolutely huge. So if I can do a twofer, then I'll go for it.
Well, if that's a twofer, that's fair enough. It's an interesting story as well, man. It kind of sucks that happened, because that could have been a huge thing.
Yeah,
and I fucking love Shook Ones as well. So.
Oh, they're so good. They're the best. Like, I had PC troubles and I was posting on Facebook all frustrated about it, and Kelly was like, dude, email me, man. It's a terrible impression, I'm sorry. And I started emailing him, and it was just trippy to me that I was getting, you know, tech support of Kelly from Shook Ones, when I was like, you know, obviously the first time I met them we all chatted, but at the same time they're a great band, and it's like absolutely meant the world that they're involved and we're now friends. That's great.
So some of the influences, I guess not influences, but people you look up to when it comes to the label, or even not even just label, but, you know, musically as well, I suppose. Because you're in bands as well. Yeah. You're in Slowlight, so
absolutely, yeah. I'm not going to super plug Slowlight, but yeah, I'm in a band called Slowlight. I don't know, man. I mean, I guess it all kind of strips back, and it's probably a massive cliche, but you've got to look at Ian Mackay and his attitude, and not just because he set up so many scenes and stuff like that, but just because he did it without trying, really. Like, he not saying he didn't work, but he never intended to do all that. He just did it the way made the most sense to him. And I think if you can sort of take that ethos into almost anything you do, like I read an interview with him recently in a magazine that was like a culture magazine, and he barely talked about music. He talked a wee bit about how Discord House is still there, and like it's not his house anymore, but he goes in there and works. But it was just his general outlook on life, and was like, he doesn't really like technology and stuff like that, and how it like limits interaction. And he's like, like, go and fucking talk to people and, like, you know, make things happen. Just being in front of someone is way more likely to make something happen than sending an email, you know. And it's just that energy and that thing which did spark a huge thing, like an absolute, like several, like wave upon wave of amazing things. So anyone that's involved in hardcore will say Ian MacKaye, but Ian MacKaye definitely. In terms of modern labels, looking at like Run for Cover and stuff like that, like they've really like taken the bull by the horns, and they are building something up. And the bands they represent, you know, I think they're fortunate to be involved, and I think they're really smart with who they pick and stuff like that. People tend to slate things when they change, and because they changed from a very pop punk based label to having a bit more of a diverse sound. I mean, they've even done a hip hop record, which is something I would love to do, but not necessarily something that I would even know where to begin. But yeah, so I think those guys, and then, you know, the great hardcore labels like Revelation and stuff like that, they've had their ups and downs through the years of financial troubles and stuff like that, but they've remained consistent to the kind of music they wanted to put out, and that means a lot. So yeah, those things
you just said.
Yeah,
just looking.
I need to stop recapping. That's my.
Don't need to stop recapping, man. It's nice to elaborate, and then, but to sum up.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I talk, I feel like I'm writing an essay, and I need to, like, in conclusion, what I just said.
It's a good way. It's a good way to talk to people, I guess. Like,
yeah,
because you could just ramble on and it just tails off, and people get frustrated if you don't come back and pick up that point. So you might as well just end that point and get on to the next one. So having something like Discord, I guess that DIY ethic means quite a lot to you then.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think with this sort of thing, like, I think the money involved and stuff like that can be the biggest problem. I think people can really focus on the profits that they can make, and that, you know, it can total sully it for you. Because I think if I was to look at our books or whatever and say, you know, whether we were in profit or not, I would be despondent, because, you know, we've never made money. But I think it's exciting that we can self-sustain, because I think at the end of the day, if I was skimming that off to go and buy a pizza and try and make that my living and stuff like that, it would get to the point where I would be negative about it, because I would be like, this isn't providing enough for me, this is what I want to do, and it's not providing enough that I can live on it. So having a full-time job that's my actual job that I can focus on just takes all that weight off that, because it means that as much as it's extra work, I just consider it to be like a really great hobby, and it's really fun. And the bottom line for me, and it's weird that I haven't touched on it yet, but the bottom line for me is the people involved. And I think DIY makes it the most about people and less about money and less about sales and less about success. I've met people from all across the world with the same ethos and attitude who will take you in. You know, you can have a drink with them, you can hang out with them, you can eat food with them, and whether or not you're in a band or whatever, but if you're involved at all, it's just there, and it's really, really easy to find. Like, the best example of that is my friend Cameron again, who's the whole inspiration behind this. I love that man. But he sent me a record from Toronto just as a Christmas present. He sent a bunch of records, but he sent this one in particular because all the records he sent were hardcore, and there's this one that was like pop punk, a band called Attention, and he included a note saying, I think Nicola will really like this one, because my wife's pretty into punk but not the heavier stuff. So he went out of his way to find one that she would like, and we were like, this is great, this is really cool. So as you do, you like them on Facebook, and then there's a Facebook update saying we're thinking of putting out a new 7-inch, and this is 3 months into us having a label. And I was like, oh cool, a band that wants to do a record, let's talk to them about it. So I was like, alright man, we could maybe help you, or we could distro it or whatever. And, you know, the singer Glenn adds me on Facebook, and we start chatting back and forward, and he was just like, incidentally, I'm going to be in Scotland in about 6 months, and we're only going to be in Glasgow for like 1 day, but, you know, hey, we could maybe hang out, have a coffee. And I was like, that sounds ace, man, cool. So he's in Scotland visiting his now wife's gran in Dalry. He got the train into Central Station, and was like, oh hey man, and he was like, alright, what you up to? I was like, well, it's actually my birthday party tonight, you should totally come. And he was just like, what? like we've literally only met each other for like 2 minutes. I was like, I know, but like it's a big opportunity. Just come, man, it'll be cool. So they went back to the hotel and left their stuff and came and hung out, and we hung out that night, and then massive hangover hanging around in Glasgow and chilling, and we just found that we were like really, really similar people and got into really similar stuff. And then this could be a really long story, but we ended up in Toronto, and it was his birthday, and we went out to his favourite bar with his friends, stayed at his house, and that's just all through me sending an email saying, yo, we could help you with that 7-inch. And all his friends were like, oh man, I can't believe you've put out Attention Records in the UK, that means so much to us, and blah blah blah. And now they have an LP and we're going to help them release it, and hopefully they'll get a Euro tour and it'll just be amazing. But this is, you know, years and years and years and years of like time going by and sort of keeping in touch and keeping it going and being like, do you still want to do this record? And being like, yeah man, you're like you guys are the best, you know. So it's all about the people, and like we have friends in France, we have friends in Singapore, we have, you know, people that have the same attitude and the same mindset of just like, we want to play music, we want to make music, we want to support music, we want to spread it around. You know, most of them happen to be punk bands, but we don't just release punk bands. There's indie bands, there's emo bands, there's loads and loads that all have that same attitude. And I think that's the underlying thing, is that the people to me are the most interesting.
The community.
The community,
yeah.
and the people and the music is the thing that holds it all together, and the thing that makes people bother to come out is the fact that there's going to be bands playing and you can hang out with them and stuff like that, as opposed to when there's a band that makes amazing music but then you just don't connect with them on a real personal level. And I've been fortunate enough that every single band that we've dealt with has been super lovely, super respectful, super happy to be involved, and we've never ever had anyone that's been like bratty or, you know, sort of self-indulgent or whatever, kind of like absolutely lovely. And I think that's essential, absolutely essential. So
one thing I was going to ask you is Struggletown has a very distinctive design ethos, I would say.
yeah,
And you're a graphic designer. Like, is that, I presume that's quite important to you to have that, but what I was wondering is that also inspired by the sort of whole Discord thing, or was that just a sort of separate decision that you made?
Like I mentioned earlier on, like even though I was involved in graphic design, I didn't know what I was doing when it came to designing record sleeves or whatever, or designing posters, or I just had to look at what was around and what was interesting to me. And posters and flyers and record sleeves have been one of my biggest sources of inspiration for the whole time. But I think it takes in everything. Like every record you've ever seen that you think's cool, I want to like emulate that. And I think even before I started up the label, when I was doing graphics for bands, I saw it as a sort of collaboration, because at the end of the day, like if someone picks up that T-shirt or whatever, that's their outward like, oh, I support this band. And a lot of people think that I don't know, those things just come from nowhere, but you kind of have to like, you have to figure it out and make something that makes sense for that band or like works for that band. And sometimes I'll have like a really strong idea and be like, oh man, like that would be so sick for that band, and they're not into it doesn't work for them. But in your head you're like, that's the perfect T-shirt or the perfect sleeve for them. So it's like, you know, it works on a collaborative level. And I think with the design ethos of Struggletown, I think the bottom line is blue and yellow. Like, don't know why, just became a thing. I designed the logo in blue and yellow and then just loved it. Everything has to be blue and yellow. I mean, not all the sleeves and stuff like that, but as much as we can, to try and create a sort of brand, I guess. And then with like the shows at Block, we had a sort of Godzilla / horror movie / big monster theme, just because of the struggle thing and having to try and some sort of sense of danger or some sort of sense of fear. And yeah, with each sort of sleeve or whatever, because I feel like it's a bit of a bonus that I get to do that. And I think sometimes people come across and go, oh, hey man, would you like to put out a record? And, you know, oh yeah, I'm into it. And I'll be like, I can also do your record sleeve. And they'll be like, wow, you do that as well? And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of part of what we do. And they're just like, oh, that's amazing, man. We had no idea who was going to do it and stuff. So that's really cool to get to do that. And yeah, like I've been a record collector for a while, and the excitement of like getting into that kind of stuff and seeing like how it's put together, and, you know, with punk and hardcore stuff, it's got a very clear look. Something really stands out when you pick up a record and it's a punk band and it doesn't look like a punk band. And I think you got to take on those rules and sort of twist them a wee bit and stuff like that. And graphics is my career, and I guess that's what I'm going to stick to. So I want to be diverse, and I want to be able to pick up and do various things with various people. So I don't want to pigeonhole myself too much with that kind of thing. So my influences are diverse, and I think it sort of comes across.
That's cool. That's pretty much answered that question entirely. So obviously you're the man in charge, I guess, of the whole thing. You're the brains behind the operation. What's been your favourite record to put out so far?
See, that's kind of like choosing a child. That's pretty difficult.
Doesn't even necessarily need to be musically, but like emotionally, I guess, is probably, and just as an important part of that question as anything else, I think. Yeah,
I guess I had a really, really good time putting out the Into It, Over It and Great Albatross split record, because when we met Evan from Into It, Over It, he was just touring himself with an acoustic guitar, and he was just the loveliest guy. We had him play at Block, and everybody would not stop talking, and like he was getting really frustrated because he was having to sing all his louder songs and his throat was going, and I was actually going around shushing people and trying to get them to calm down. And I love Block, it's a great venue, but it's not a great venue for acoustic bands because it's a pub and people go in there just for food and a chat. So you're not going to get that nice respectful silence that you get in other venues when there's acoustic bands playing. But anyway, you know, that was another one that Nick was just like, oh yeah, let's just put on Into It, Over It, at least playing, like I'll just email him and we'll do that. And I was like, you can't just do that. So fortunately he did, and we chatted to him, and then again Nick was like, we should ask him to do a record, let's ask him to do a record. And he'd played at the Captain's Rest with the Great Albatross, and me being all cool and stuff, I was just like sitting upstairs eating my food when the Great Albatross were playing, like, I won't even go down the stairs. And then Evan was just like, have you met Wesley? He's amazing, like his music's so good, you should put out his records, he's so good. And I was just like, oh hey man, and he was just like this really friendly guy, and like we got to chatting about various things and stuff like that. And I eventually checked out his old band Boris Smile and like the few things that Great Albatross had put out, and Nick sent an email to Evan like, do you want to do a record? And he was like, yeah, I could do like a B-sides 7-inch or something. And then he was like, what about we do it as a split with Wesley? And I was like, cool, yeah, that sounds great. So we just sort of worked on that, and we decided to do it as a picture disc, which turned out to be probably a terrible idea because we probably would have sold out of it like within 5 minutes if it wasn't a picture disc, because people are really weird about them. Didn't know how weird they were at the time, but I guess people really stick to their guns about hating picture discs. But we sold loads, and obviously because it's an amazing record and it's got, you know, Evan's songs and Wesley's song on it. And we got our friend Christina to give us some of the photos she'd taken, which are aerial views of Iceland, which is a sort of personal touch for me because my brother and his family had just moved over there. So it was quite exciting to like get these beautiful looking discs with these amazing photos and these fantastic records. So I guess it was like, that was quite a big emotional feeling when you're kind of like, oh, this is another big record to work on. It actually ended up coming out before the Shook Ones record, so as much as it went into motion after it, that was the biggest record we'd released at that time, and it probably still is to an extent, but it definitely put us on the map as well. I mean, 90% of the people that ordered that in the pre-order were American, so there's now a bunch of American kids with like Struggletown stickers and Struggletown records in their collection, which is huge. And then, you know, we had people getting in touch and being like, oh, have you got test presses and all this stuff and all that stuff that American record collectors do. So, you know, it put us on their map a wee bit and led to other things. Like, definitely led to us working with Koji, which is one of our more recent records. And I think that was a big deal. That and the Wolves at Heart split with Last Call was big as well. I won't go into the massive story of that, but maybe I should just put out records that don't have massive stories behind them, because that would be quicker. But
where's the fun of that though? Like,
essentially it was the same situation. Wolves at Heart had put a ton of time and effort into their songs, and I thought they were great, and they wanted to put it out on 7-inch, and I thought the best exposure for this would be a split. We need another band. We asked a bunch of bands, and they were all like, oh, we don't have any new material, or we would love to do it but we can't afford to go in and record. And then I just sort of reached out to this band Last Call, who had put out their album Dog Years, and they were doing it all themselves. They're from Las Vegas, working really, really hard. And I was like, well, I mean, what have I got to lose? I'll just go, hey, basically, here's the deal. We will do it all. All we want is some of your music to put on it. And then it turned into an even better situation where they went, nah, that's great. We want to do a record. We'll go and record it. We'll put half in, we'll distro it over here. We've got our own label. And just turn out to be the nicest people who do great music and have exactly the same attitude. So it was such a gamble to just email a random band out of the blue and say, hey, do you want to be a split? But it worked so well. And because it was Wolves at Heart, which was our first band, and like it was the first time. A lot of the first releases, we just sort of chipped in and gave people our logo and they'd sent us some, which was really nice. But that was the first one we worked together where, you know, it was as much us as another label, and, you know, it was 50-50 and properly, like, on vinyl anyway. And it was just really exciting to get to be involved in that whole process and finally get the records and do a release show and do it all that way, which was really fun. I really, really, really want to see Last Call and hang out and, like, meet those guys, because, like, it's all been remote and transatlantic chat. And they deserve to do really well because they're amazing. So check them out.
I think we could probably wrap up. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything at all?
No, just the support of all the people around me, like my wife and Nicola and my cats and my family, my friends, and the people that come to shows and buy records and stuff like that is the only reason that this is a thing. And if, you know, people stopped turning up and buying stuff, then I wouldn't be able to do it anymore. So I appreciate it so much, and it will continue as long as there are people there to buy it and want it to continue. So yeah, thanks very much for interviewing me. It's an absolute pleasure.
It has been a total pleasure, man. I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So there you have it. That was quite a long interview. I hope you liked it. I really enjoyed speaking to Stephen. He's a really nice guy, and he's got a lot to say about punk and hardcore and the whole DIY ethos, which I find quite engaging because it's the kind of thing that I'm into, you know. So I guess I'm still always going to be a punk at heart, regardless of what happens. So yeah, thanks for listening. Be back next week with another episode. Please rate us and review us on iTunes. Sign up to the newsletter. You can get both of those on www.thecuratorpodcast.com. Bookmark that shit. Also on SoundCloud at The Curator Pod, if you want to get it on there. And you can also find us on Stitcher and stuff too. Please hit me up on Facebook or on Twitter. On Facebook it's The Curator Podcast, and on Twitter it's The Curator Pod. So please check that out. Give us a like, give us a follow. I'd really appreciate that. So yeah, thanks very much for listening. Again, I say that again. Thanks very much for listening. It's been a pleasure. I hope you're enjoying the podcasting journey. I know that I certainly am, which is good. So I'm going to play you out now with a song from The Sinking Feeling. They're kind of an emo band from Glasgow. So yeah, this is called Not Now. Thank you very much. Until next time.
It's a sunny day, but I'm stuck inside my head again. In my room, and I can't hear myself changing tune. I'm so surprised that I haven't seen your face in a while. Have you died, or have you just forgotten? And all the games you play, you cut me down to size. You make me hate my life. And how could I